Good evening. Get ready to talk and then some in your throat. Good evening, everybody. You know, when you're between preachers like this and you don't have the retired preachers we used to have, so you figure sooner or later it's going to be your turn. And so you kind of in the back of your mind think, okay, what'd be a good sermon? I was thinking, what's going on in the world today? I think I could get a good one on kindness. And then Ryan shows up a couple weeks ago and preaches on kindness. And then I had, and thinking about, I think I could get one up about, talking, using your words. James, talking about how dangerous your tongue is. Then last Sunday night, first thing John Cruz said is, sticks and stones may break my bones. I'm like, well, that one's out. I'll have to come up with something else. We've all heard that phrase that people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. Another way of, I saw it somewhere, it's like you don't change the world by your opinion, you change the world by your actions. And listening to a preacher one time, and basically he was saying, everybody talks about knowing the Bible, knowing the Bible, knowing the Bible. We need to talk about doing the Bible. And so in putting things in action, nothing against knowing the Bible, but, we need to do the Bible. Look at Psalms 145, verse 8. David lists some virtues of the Lord. It says, the Lord is gracious, full of compassion, slow to anger, and of great mercy. When we look at Jesus, he showed compassion in a lot of things he did. And he used compassion in his teaching. And in 1 Peter, we're told, Jesus came to be our example, and we're supposed to be like Jesus. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about compassion. And like always, you kind of think, well, what is compassion? Because when you look at a lot of these verses between King James Version and ESV, some of them say compassion, some of them say pity. I'm like, well, what's the difference between compassion and pity? And then you think of kindness. There's difference in these words. So I asked Nancy on the way in church this morning, I said, what's the difference between compassion and pity? She goes, I don't want your pity. I guess you'll take my compassion, but not my pity. And I tried to use the iPad, not pretend to do Greek, so I pushed the little Strong's thing, and basically the same word was used. So a lot of those translations have the same word for pity and compassion. But so I got out the dictionary, and there was a slight difference in today's word. Words change a little bit, but compassion, it said, was a sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. Pity was a sympathetic sorrow for others' distress and suffering. It don't say anything about alleviating it. So I guess if you have compassion, you want to alleviate the suffering. If you just have pity, maybe it doesn't come into play. But Jesus showed compassion, but the purpose of those miracles he did wasn't necessarily compassion. He showed compassion, but, miracles were used to give Jesus credibility, to show he came from God. It's what Nicodemus said in John chapter 3. Nicodemus came to Jesus and said, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher from God, for no one can do the signs that you do unless God is with him. So, the signs showed that, Jesus was God, but a lot of times Jesus was moved to compassion on a lot of the miracles and all he did. So we're going to look at some tonight and try to tie everything together. I'm going to be in Matthew for most of it, so if you want to follow along, we'll put it in Matthew. I'm going to start out in chapter 9. I'll push the right button here. And let's go down about verse 35. And this is, I'll read 35, 38, but I just wanted to, Jesus demonstrated his compassion. This is when he gave the limited commission. let's start reading verse 35. And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he will send forth laborers into his harvest. So Jesus saw the people like they had sheep with no shepherd, and compassion, is what leads into him giving the limited commission about going for the harvest. Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 14. And we're going to go to about, let's start about, let's see where I am here. I'll find it here. In verse about 14. Okay, Matthew 14. And, actually, I want to go a little earlier, because this is right after John the Baptist was beheaded. So Jesus, John was his cousin. He just found out that John had been beheaded in prison. I'll start reading in verse 11. And his head was brought to the charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. So Jesus, was hearing about John's death. When Jesus heard it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities, because by this time, Jesus had the reputation doing all the signs. People wanted to follow him everywhere. And he's just kind of sounds like he's just trying to get away. And they followed him. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion towards them. And he healed their sick. And when it was evening, the disciples came to him, saying, this is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go to the villages and buy themselves food. And Jesus said they don't need to depart. And this is, when he got the loaves and the fish and fed them. But as far as healing their sick, his motivation there, again, was compassion. We go over one more chapter, Matthew chapter 15. This is when he fed the people again. They're kind of all runs together in time, about 3 days later. Let's go to verse 32. Matthew 15:32. Then Jesus called his disciples and said, I have compassion for the multitude, because they continue with me. These people are following him. And they've been with him for now 3 days and have nothing to eat. He said, I will not send them away fasting, unless they faint in the way. And the disciples came unto him, whence would you have so much bread in the wilderness to fill so great a multitude? And then he got the loaves and fed the people with his compassion. Let's go on to Matthew chapter 20 is the next one I'll look at. In Matthew chapter 20, he gave sight to blind men, chapter 20, verse about 29. It said, when they departed from Jericho, a great multitude followed him. Like I say, people were still following Jesus everywhere. And behold, 2 blind men were sitting by the wayside. When they heard that Jesus passed by, cried out, saying, have mercy on us, O Lord, thou son of David. The multitude rebuked them, because they should hold their peace. Now, y'all don't holler at Jesus, but they cried more, saying, have mercy on us, O Lord, thou son of David. Showing belief in Jesus there by, calling him the son of David. And Jesus stood still and called them and said, what will ye that I shall do to you? They said unto him, Lord, that our eyes may be open. So Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. So then again, the miracle proves his divinity, but compassion moved him towards it. We can move on over to Mark chapter 1. And down around verse 40. And this is, he cleans the leper here. And when the leper came to him, beseeching him and kneeling down to him and saying to him, if thou wilt, can you make me clean? And Jesus again, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him. So compassion again motivated Jesus to fulfill his request. And in Luke, I'll look at one more. Luke chapter 7. In verse about 11, and it came to pass the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and many people. Now when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother. She was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw, he had compassion on her, and said, Weep not. And he came and touched the bier, and said that bare him, and stood still, and said, Young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up and began to speak. And we can go on and on through the New Testament. I mean, when, Legion, the man with all the demons that everybody was afraid of and running from, Jesus, healed him. So compassion was like I say to me, the motivator behind a lot of the miracles. A couple of times he used compassion when he was just teaching. We're all familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, everybody knew that Jews had nothing to do with the Samaritans, and so, he tells the story. And this is right after he'd said, the lawyer had asked him what's the greatest commandment. He talks about loving your neighbor as yourself. Then he goes on and tells the story about the Good Samaritan, and the person who you would think might be the villain to the Jews ends up being the hero of the story by showing compassion to the man on the side of the road. And basically, the lesson is that everyone is our neighbor. So as far as when we show compassion, it's everybody. And with the story of the prodigal son, same sort of thing. We know the story. The son said, give me my money, I'm out of here. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. He goes and lives a wild life, blows his money on all kind of things that were admonition or whatever to the Jews. So he lives in such a way that, he ends up eating with the pigs. Then when he decides to come home, and you remember the story, the father sees him afar off and just runs to him and gives him a hug and gives compassion to him. And it's just, like I say, we need to, the Father there represents God, and when you come back, God will have compassion on us and take us back. So I did those to get to here. It's like, let's try to make where the rubber meets the road. Where can we be compassionate in our, every day when we run into things? First thing I want to talk about is real current, of course, is you can be compassionate during times of crisis. It seems like, people mention a lot, even in the pulpit. The world seems to be going a little bit crazy right now compared to what we normally see. But natural disasters, wars, pandemics, those have been going on as long as the world's gone along. I have a little quote here. Marcus Aurelius was Roman emperor, 160, 180 range. Most of it, not getting history lesson, but he was a pretty good emperor. That was the end of the Pax Romana. But while he was emperor, there was a plague lasted 10 or 15 years in the Roman Empire. And this is what he wrote. Remember that everything has always been the same and keeps recurring. It makes no difference whether you see the same things recur in 100 years or 200 years or over an infinite period. It sounded to me a little bit like Ecclesiastes 1:9. Solomon said, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there's nothing new under the sun. Remember when Jesus was giving the warnings on the destruction of Jerusalem, talking about wars, rumor of wars, disease, all kind of pestilence. So there's nothing new about the kind of things our country, of course, we don't know the future, how this will play out historically, but unless it gets a lot worse, this isn't really a blip on the radar of history as far as illnesses. Whole civilizations have disappeared for, disease. A lot of Native Americans, Mayans, and a lot of things. But even in our own, the plagues of the Middle Ages that killed just humongous percentages. We hear about talk about things I was talking to Mama the other day in the yard, and she was like, things are bad. This is just a bad year. And I'm like, well, what about 1968? And I was a little kid. Sounded like you had the Vietnam War going, you had riots, you had Martin Luther King killed, you had Robert Kennedy killed. she goes, yeah, that was bad. And then, you read about the 1918 the Spanish flu thing. Monty, how was that? Was that rough? Monty said it wasn't that bad. But anyhow, it's just the crisis happened, and the way our country is now with things going, we're kind of in something. So what to me, it gives us an opportunity to show compassion to people. So how do we do it? I think we need to recognize the emotional factors of a crisis. I mean, when things are like this, people are emotionally torn. I mean, it's just how people are made. You can't ignore it. And when God revealed himself, there's emotional terms that God puts on himself. God's talking about he loves, he hates, he has compassion, things anger. So emotion is, and we're supposed to be like God. I mean, emotion is just part of it, part of how we are. But in any time people we love are facing danger or something, we can get a little anxious. I mean, that's human nature. But we don't want our emotions to be irrational hysteria. That's, as Christians, as examples, to be able to help others emotionally, we can't get there. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 5, Paul said, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Try to be something stable emotionally in the middle of everything going on. And, Jesus took care of needs when he saw the people that were sheep without a shepherd. He provided them, a direction. Another thing I kind of put in here, I saw it's, I'll read what I wrote. It said, Jesus is somebody who had all the answers. Jesus had all the answers, but he still sat there and listened to people. He could have, sat there and boom, to me, said something. But I think the fact that Jesus listened, was part of what helped people. Now, in time of crisis, there's also material needs. And, God calls us to practical service. And, if y'all can come on Thursday, but the food thing is real neat. I mean, to see people getting things to eat. But let's look at James chapter 2. Because, let's see, you can get in here. In James chapter 2, 14 through 16, God tells us, what does it profit, my brother, though a man say he hath faith and not works? Can faith save him? If a brother or a sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say to them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding ye give them not those things which are needful to the body, what does it profit? So we need to, do something. It's like you say, somebody comes to you and I'm hungry, and you say, man, I'm praying for you. That doesn't help him not be hungry. It's nice you pray for him, but, we need to put things in action. In the New Testament, things weren't good in Rome financially, and Christians across the Roman Empire gathered money and stuff and sent to Jerusalem to help out. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 10, it says, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially those of the household of faith. So, pay attention to people's emotional needs, pay attention to material needs, but we need to try to keep spiritual matters kind of central, because in our society, there are other parts of society that can help with people's emotional needs and their physical needs. We want to be a part of that, but other people can do that. But the spiritual needs are where the church really needs to come into play, because as long as wanting to help people other ways, we want people to go to heaven also. Let's turn over to Philippians chapter 4. Wrong one there. I guess Philippians 4 is one of those chapters. It's like you always end up there for some reason. There's a lot of good stuff in there. But we want people to have a life in Christ. Philippians 4, verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. If we get our hearts and all thinking of good things, there's the benefits there. And if we go up to verse 6, right before that, It said, be careful but for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God which passes all understanding shall keep your hearts and mind through Christ. We can help people, see the peace that comes through Jesus. A lot of people think in terms of spiritual blessings, they think heaven, and thinks in terms of the next world. But there's a lot of peace to be found in this world as far as from spiritual blessings also. So Jesus addressed the emotional, physical, and spiritual needs, the people he came to, and I think the church, we should use about every opportunity we can to do the same. And just, I put down another list of things that times we might be able to show compassion and things to look for. And this isn't an exhaustive list. Everybody can think at times, but I wrote down the father list. You normally think in terms of like orphans, but then some of it comes from what I see at school all the time. I just wrote dysfunctional families. There's a lot of kids, a lot of people that are just not in a good situation family-wise. And, look for it, be aware of it, find ways to help them, be compassionate. You can't change their family situation, but you might be able to provide some stability somehow in there. Be compassionate to the elderly. There's, I know there's a lot of people here older than me, there's some younger, but those of y'all that are 20, 30 years older than me, I don't know if I could, these aches are already cranking. I don't know how they're going to be in another 20 years. So, there's just complications that come with getting older, and we need to be aware. We need to try to help people who need help. A lot of people are discouraged. A lot of people are scared. Recognize and help them. I wrote down, families with difficult children or those with special needs. There's a lot of families who just are at wit's end with their kids or something. Just help out as you can. Try to provide a relief to the family. A lot of people suffer from long-term illnesses, that face it, aren't going to get better. You can't cure the illness, but you can show compassion with it. When someone, I have down here, and I was going to get into it, Bud this morning told the story, and everybody's pretty familiar with it, of David, how he, got Bathsheba from Uriah, had Uriah killed, so you had David, who was guilty of adultery, of murder. And then when Nathan said, "You are the man," he was truly penitent and repented, and he ended up being called a man after God's own heart. And think of it, I wrote down here, when someone's restored, when somebody messes up and then comes back in and wants to, come back and be restored to the family of God, we need to be compassionate to that person. Because I got to thinking of David. If we had somebody here that killed somebody and stole their wife, and if they, paid their debt to society and came back in the door saying, "I want to belong again," how welcoming would we be? Because that just kind of goes against us. But, God, welcome back somebody that did what David did. If somebody messes up and repents and wants to come back, we need to make sure that we're supportive of them. But basically, I want to say we don't have to look far to find places we can be compassionate. We really don't. In part of our own family right here, we have people that are hurting. We have people that are lonely. We have people that are troubled. We have people that are suffering. We got people that are unsure of the future. And I bet you all that's within this room right here. And so, let's try to be compassionate. Let's try to be understanding and try to help people where we can. There's a song we sometimes sing, and it says, "Does Jesus care?" It says, "Does Jesus care when my heart is pained too deeply for mirth or song, when the burdens press and the cares distress, as the day grows weary and long?" And the answer in the song is, yes, he cares. I know he cares. His heart is touched with my grief. We know Jesus cares. We want to be like Jesus. We want our hearts to be touched with other people's grief so we can help them where we can. And so that's what I came up with for tonight. If anyone has any need they need to come and make us aware of, and come out, we stand and sing.